January 13th, 1997, the White House. Vernon Baker was 77 years old when President Clinton placed the Medal of Honor around his neck, the nation's highest military decoration. 52 years had passed since April 5, 1945, when Baker led his weapons platoon up an Italian hillside toward Castle Aginolfi. 19 of his 25 men became casualties that day, killed or wounded on the slopes below the German strongpoint. In those few hours, Baker destroyed 9 enemy soldiers, 3 machine gun positions, 1 observation post, and 1 dugout. He then volunteered to lead the battalion through minefields the following day. His company commander recommended him for the Medal of Honor. The recommendation was downgraded to the Distinguished Service Cross. In 1993, the Army commissioned a study on racial bias in World War II medal awards. The researchers found systematic patterns of discrimination. Baker's case was one of 10 identified for review. By 1997, only Baker remained alive to receive the recognition. This is the documented account of Vernon Joseph Baker, soldier of the 92nd Infantry Division, the circumstances of April 5th to 6th, 1945, and the 52 years between his actions and their full acknowledgement. Vernon Joseph Baker was born December 17, 1919, in Cheyenne, Wyoming. When he was 4, both parents died in an automobile accident. He and his 2 sisters went to live with their paternal grandparents, first in Cheyenne, then in Clarinda, Iowa. The family relationship proved difficult. As a teenager, Baker was sent to Father Flanagan's boys' home in Nebraska for 2 years. His grandfather's advice stayed with him. "If you want to survive, boy, learn to adapt." Baker graduated from Clarinda High School in 1937, during the Depression. Employment opportunities for young black men were limited. He worked as a shoe shiner and railroad porter in Clarinda. In April 1941, Baker attempted to enlist. The recruiter told him there were no available quotas. He returned 2 months later to a different recruiting office and was accepted in June 1941. The U.S. Army remained segregated. Black soldiers served in separate units, typically under white officers. This structure would remain in place until President Truman's Executive Order 9981 in 1948. Baker completed basic training at Camp Walters, Texas, then was assigned to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, where the 92nd Infantry Division was forming. The 92nd was one of 2 all-black infantry divisions in the Army. In October 1942, Baker was selected for Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning, Georgia. He completed the 13-week course and received his commission as second lieutenant on January 11, 1943. He returned to Fort Huachuca and was assigned as a platoon leader in the 371st Infantry Regiment's Weapons Company. The regiment trained in Arizona, then at Camp Polk, Louisiana, preparing for deployment. His sister had suggested military service as one of the few paths to stable employment. Baker later recalled he simply wanted steady work and a chance to serve. On July 15, 1944, the 92nd Infantry Division, approximately 7,000 men, boarded the SS Mariposa at Newport News, Virginia. After a 2-week Atlantic crossing, they reached Naples on July 28th. The Allied advance in Italy had slowed. German forces held a defensive line across the Apennines known as the Gothic Line, a system of fortifications, bunkers, and obstacles designed to block the Allied advance northward. The 92nd Division was assigned to the western sector, along the Ligurian coast and into the mountains. The terrain was difficult: steep hills, narrow valleys, limited roads. German defensive positions took advantage of the geography. Baker's first significant combat came on October 8, 1944, near Saravetsa. During a night patrol, he encountered a German sentry. In the hand-to-hand engagement, Baker killed the German, but sustained a gunshot wound to his arm. The adrenaline masked the injury until he returned to his lines. He spent 2 months recovering at a hospital in Pisa, returning to his unit near Somocolonia on December 26, 1944. That same day, he witnessed the aftermath of an action by Lieutenant John R. Fox. Fox, another black officer, had called artillery fire on his own position to stop a German counterattack. Fox was killed, but the defensive line held. Fox would later receive the Medal of Honor posthumously, part of the same 1997 ceremony that honored Baker. Through the winter of 1944 to 45, the 375th Regiment conducted limited operations in the mountain sector. The terrain and weather made large-scale advances difficult. Both sides held defensive positions through much of the winter. By early April 1945, Allied forces were preparing for a spring offensive. The goal was to break through the remaining German defensive lines and advance into the Po Valley. Every strong point needed to be reduced. Castle Agenolfi was one such position. Castle Agenolfi sat on high ground east of Highway 1, the coastal road. German forces had fortified the position with machine guns, mortars, and connecting trenches. Previous attempts to take the position had failed. On April 5, 1945, at approximately 5 a.m., Company C, 1st Battalion, 371st Infantry Regiment, began its advance. Lieutenant Baker's weapons platoon moved ahead of the rifle platoons due to lighter equipment and greater mobility. By 7 a.m., Baker's platoon reached a ravine approximately 250 yards south of the castle. Visibility was poor due to morning fog. While reconnoitering a position for his machine gun, Baker observed two cylindrical objects protruding from a slit in an embankment, a German observation post with binoculars or periscopes. Baker approached from below and fired a full 8-round clip from his M1 rifle into the position. 2 Germans were killed. The observation post was eliminated. Moving along the slope, Baker encountered a camouflaged machine gun nest. The 2-man crew was eating and not at their weapon. Baker shot both before they could respond. Company Commander Captain John F. Runyon joined Baker's group. As they advanced, a German soldier emerged from the ravine and threw a grenade that failed to detonate. Baker shot the soldier as he attempted to retreat. Baker then descended into the ravine alone and located a dugout entrance. He threw 2 grenades into the position, then entered with his submachine gun. He killed 2 more German soldiers inside and 1 who attempted to flee. At approximately 7:30, German forces realized the Americans had penetrated their forward defenses. Machine gun and mortar fire increased significantly. Baker's platoon, now exposed on the slope, began taking casualties. 6 men were killed in the initial barrage. The platoon medic was shot by a sniper while attempting to treat wounded. Additional men were wounded by the sustained fire. Captain Runyon called for reinforcements, but the other company elements could not advance through the German fire. Baker's group, reduced from 25 to approximately 19 effectives, was isolated. Runyon ordered a withdrawal in 2 groups, lightly wounded first, then severely wounded. Baker would provide covering fire. Baker reportedly said to Runyon, "Captain, we can't withdraw. We have to stay here and fight it out." However, military orders superseded personal preference. As the withdrawal began, Baker identified 2 German machine gun positions that threatened the retreat route. With covering fire from his remaining men, he crawled to each position and destroyed them with grenades. The casualty count for Baker's platoon: 19 of 25 men killed or wounded. Baker's personal tally: 9 German soldiers killed, 3 machine gun nests destroyed, 1 observation post eliminated, 1 dugout cleared. That night, Baker received new orders. The battalion would renew the attack on April 6th. They needed someone familiar with the terrain to lead them through the German minefields. Baker volunteered for the mission. On April 6, 1945, Baker led the battalion through minefields under fire. The advance succeeded, and Castle Agenolfi was taken. The division's objective was secured. Captain Runyon submitted an after-action report documenting Baker's actions. The report described the systematic destruction of enemy positions, the leadership under fire, and the voluntary mine-clearing mission. Runyon recommended Baker for the Medal of Honor. The recommendation went through channels. At some point in the approval process, it was downgraded to the Distinguished Service Cross, the Army's second highest decoration for valor. On July 4, 1945, in Viareggio, Italy, Lieutenant Baker received the Distinguished Service Cross. This made him one of only 9 African Americans to receive the award during World War II. Baker was not informed that he had been recommended for a higher decoration. Standard military protocol did not require such notification. In later interviews, Baker stated, "The Medal of Honor didn't even cross my mind. I got the Distinguished Service Cross, did my job, and that was it." The statistics were clear. Of the 433 Medals of Honor awarded for World War II service, none went to African Americans. This occurred despite 1.2 million black soldiers serving during the war. Baker remained in Italy on occupation duties until February 1947. He continued his military career through the desegregation of the armed forces in 1948 and served in Korea. He commanded integrated units in the 11th Airborne Division, among the first black officers to do so. After 27 years of service, Baker retired in 1968 at the rank of First Lieutenant. He worked for the American Red Cross for over 20 years, assisting veterans with benefits and services. Baker maintained a low profile regarding his wartime service. He did not actively campaign for recognition or seek publicity. The actions of April 5, 1945 were documented in his service record, but were not widely known outside military historical circles. The question of why no African American received the Medal of Honor in World War II remained largely unexamined for decades. In 1993, the U.S. Army contracted with Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, to conduct a systematic study. The research question: was there racial bias in the Medal of Honor award process during World War II? The research team, led by historians and military experts, reviewed thousands of commendation and award records. They examined the approval process, the language used in recommendations, and the comparative treatment of similar actions. Their findings documented clear patterns. Black soldiers' nominations were downgraded more frequently than comparable white soldiers' nominations. Descriptions of actions by black soldiers often use different language that minimize their initiative or leadership. The study identified 10 African American soldiers whose documented actions met Medal of Honor criteria, but who had received lesser awards or no recognition. Vernon Baker was one of the 10. In 1996, Congress passed legislation authorizing the President to award the Medal of Honor to these individuals, waiving the normal time limits for such awards. 7 of the 10 cases were approved for upgrade. 6 recipients were deceased. Baker, at age 77 and living in St. Mary's, Idaho, was the sole survivor. On January 13, 1997, President Clinton conducted a ceremony at the White House. The families of the 6 posthumous recipients received their loved ones' medals. Then Baker stepped forward. The President placed the Medal of Honor around Baker's neck and shook his hand. The ceremony lasted approximately 40 minutes. Baker's remarks were brief and focused on his fallen comrades. In media interviews following the ceremony, Baker maintained his characteristic understatement. He noted that many soldiers had performed similar actions and that he accepted the medal on behalf of all who had served. The Medal of Honor citation formally recognized his actions of April 5 to 6, 1945. The systematic elimination of enemy positions, the covering of the withdrawal under fire, and the mine-clearing operation. The distinction between the Medal of Honor and the Distinguished Service Cross is primarily one of degree. Both recognize extraordinary valor. The Medal of Honor is reserved for actions above and beyond the call of duty at the risk of one's life. Baker's original recommendation clearly met this standard. The 52-year delay represented not a re-evaluation of his actions, but a correction of the evaluation process itself. Following the 1997 ceremony, Baker participated in historical education efforts. He spoke at the National World War II Museum Symposium on the African American experience in the war. He gave interviews for documentary projects and historical archives. Vernon Baker died on July 13, 2010, at his home in St. Mary's, Idaho, after a long illness. He was 90 years old. On September 24, 2010, he was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. 3 other Medal of Honor recipients attended the service. The ceremony included a 21-gun salute and the presentation of the flag to his widow. In 2006, the main street in Clarinda, Iowa, was renamed in his honor. Various military facilities and training areas have since been named for Baker and other 1997 Medal of Honor recipients. Baker's military awards include Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart, and various service medals. His decorations reflected both his individual actions and his 27 years of continuous service. The 1997 Medal of Honor awards to 7 African American World War II veterans represented an institutional acknowledgement of systematic bias in the awards process. The Army's study documented that racial discrimination had affected not only award decisions, but the entire recognition system. The case also illustrated the limitations of delayed justice. 6 of the 7 recipients never knew their service would receive this recognition. Their families received the medals posthumously, decades after the events. Baker lived long enough to receive his medal, but the 19 men of his platoon who became casualties on April 5, 1945, did not. Their names are recorded in the official casualty lists of the 375th Infantry Regiment. Military historians note that Baker's actions on April 5, the systematic reduction of multiple enemy positions, the tactical awareness under fire, and the subsequent volunteer mission, represent a clear example of combat leadership. The documentation was thorough and the witnesses numerous. The question is not whether Baker's actions merited the Medal of Honor in 1945. The evidence suggests they did. The question is why the normal evaluation process failed to reach that conclusion for 52 years. The answer, documented in the Shaw University study, lies in the systematic undervaluation of African American soldiers' contributions during the segregated military era. Vernon Baker's story serves as both a recognition of individual valor and a historical marker of institutional failure. The 52-year interval between action and full acknowledgement represents the time required for institutions to address their own systemic problems. Baker himself maintained that he accepted the medal for all who served, particularly those who did not return. The 19 casualties from his platoon on April 5, 1945, are part of that accounting.